Hey everyone, and welcome to another Konoha Reviews. It's still October, and Halloween is upon us, so that means we take a look at some of the horror games that are being released late October. Probably the most anticipated title for me personally was the next entry in the Dark Pictures Anthology in the form of Little Hope. This game is created by the same makers who made the great game Until Dawn, a Heavy Rain style horror game that was very cliché in its characters, but resulted in a very engaging game, story, and scares that catered to many different genres. The Dark Pictures project would promise a handful of smaller games and stories, each being around 4 to 5 hours instead of the 8-hour Until Dawn. What's more is that these games would be able to be played multiplayer. And this was a huge thing for me when this was announced, because ever since Heavy Rain, this is how I play these type of games. Heavy Rain, Until Dawn, and Detroit Become Human are all single-player games, but have multiple protagonists who you take turn in playing. And thus, I have always played those games with a friend, and at the beginning, we would each choose a handful of our own characters and just pass the controller along whenever we played as one of our chosen characters. I would highly recommend playing those games this way, and I was so happy to find out that this method was then put in a game idea by Supermassive Games. Because with these games you can either play with 2 people online, but also up to 5 players couch co-op, where one passes the controller whenever a new character has its turn. The first of those short games from the Dark Pictures Anthology, the Medan, was released last year and was, to be honest, a bit of a missed start, since it did not even come close to the awesomeness of Until Dawn. Since the game was shorter, the characters were way less developed, and as a player, one felt much less involved with them, or didn't really care about them. The setting, though a bit more original than your average horror game, also resulted in sometimes it not being that memorable, with being on the ocean and a ghost ship that you explored where it was pretty much one rusty corridor after the other. It had some very good scares here and there, but the twist on what the actual evil was on the ship was a bit of a letdown, and in the end, it was a quite forgettable game. But that game had the disadvantage of coming after such a great title like Until Dawn, and I'm sure that after playing Medan, many of us had our expectations lowered a bit in anticipation of Little Hope. But I am happy to say that Little Hope delivers a great experience and a really solid, engaging story with some interesting twists and turns. The setting is way more traditional than Medan. It's about an abandoned ghost town and witchcraft. But the irony with horror is that cliché or tradition is sometimes really good. Some horror creators try different settings or types of scares, and though I'm all for innovation and trying out new things, many of these attempts fail to scare us as much as the traditional things. I think it might be because of how engraved those scary stories are to us. Think about it. Scary stories like this have been told hundreds and hundreds of years even before we were born, so entire generations have grown up with scary tales like this and why it's still so effective. Same thing with, for example, that cliché type of Asian horror with a pale white girl whose face is covered by long black hair. They have told stories about those types hundreds of years ago, and we still find that scary and effective today. And so even though the setting of Little Hope is much more common to what we have seen before, it's all the more effective because of it, and the story they built around it is original enough to where it stands on its own. The story in the game revolves around the ghost town of Little Hope and 5 survivors of a bus crash that now have to find a way out of there. The cast consists of main character Andrew, played by actor Will Poulter, who I really liked, and he does great performances in movies like Detroit, Midsommar, and The Revenant. He often plays bad guys in those movies, and he delivered a great performance as the main good guy in this story. Then there's his college professor John, and fellow students Taylor and Daniel, and also senior student Angela, who's older than John himself. All 5 have survived a terrible bus crash and find themselves lost on this foggy road as they cannot seem to find an exit through the thick fog. They will have to search for help in the town, but danger is lurking in the woods. Already early on in the game, you find hints of witchcraft like effigies, weird dolls, and markings on trees. Much faster than Medan, it's already established here that danger is lurking and that things are not as they seem. The sightings of a little girl running through the forest, or the sound of metal scraping across the road behind you, hinting that something is chasing you very slowly. These hints and sightings often go paired with a loud noise, and yes, this game is also, once again, full of jump scares. I will say that by now, I have become used to the supermassive game's formula, and where both Until Dawn and Medan scared me very badly a dozen times or so, I only really got jump scared twice in this game, one involving a phone. All of the other jump scares are not necessarily bad, but they have the same type of timing and delivery as in games like Until Dawn. A deer that crosses the road, or a hand grabbing you when you try and pick something up. Both have been done very effectively in Until Dawn and Medan, and so in terms of their jump scare game, I do think that Little Hope is a little weaker. One of the reasons too is that some of the horror imagery is not necessarily all that scary. Medan might not have been that great of a game, but the visuals of the horrific things you saw definitely stayed with me. The grotesque looking nurse was of course very frightening, or the little child with his flashy skull are a lot more scarier than some of the things you will see here, like an old woman in white. Now that doesn't mean that Little Hope is completely without its cool and horrific visuals, and definitely towards the end of the game, you get some pretty cool looking dangers you have to deal with, though it once again goes for that creepy mangled zombie / golem vibe we have seen in many games, including of course the recent Amnesia Rebirth. As the characters explore the ghost town, they come across these sections where they are pulled back in time to the 17th century when the witch trials happened in that very same town. Slowly as you move on, more and more of that background story is revealed, and the particular interesting thing is that many of the characters from that time are complete lookalikes from the actors that play Andrew and the main cast. They are connected somehow despite being from different times, and the story that it thereby presents is actually quite cool and intriguing. It would have been very easy to once again step into cliché and familiar territory, but the twist they give with these type of dangers that are following you is pretty cool. Especially because the game and its story give enough room for you to play detective a little bit and use clues you get here and there to create a narrative of your own. I have played this game with good friend Woozy, and all throughout the game's story, we came up with different theories and possible explanations on what was happening. We even had some revelations and aha moments before those were even revealed by the game itself, but not to the point where everything was already clear to us and we were just waiting for the game to tell us what we already knew. All throughout, we kept getting to more and more answers ourselves, but there were always a few questions that we were unsure of. It's really well done and so much better than the story and twists presented in Medan. Little Hope presents a story with a surprising amount of layers, and that encourages discussion if you play this with multiple people. I will say that the absolute ending was a bit quickly resolved, and would have loved a bit more time to wrap things up for various characters, but the final twist was also pretty cool, and though not exactly the way it was portrayed in the story, it was something that I laid on the table a long time before that happened. I will not spoil the ending, but we ended up with 3 characters living out of the 5. Ironically, it were both Woozy's characters that died, but one was because of lag due to the remote play function not working perfectly. But that has nothing to do with the game, and instead is something to do with Steam, so I will not fault the game for that at all. In terms of gameplay, the game is pretty much what you have come to expect from earlier Heavy Rain style games. You walk around looking for clues and talking to fellow members, and have a quick time event now and then to avoid dying or getting into further trouble. One thing that is a lot better is that the button prompts are a lot clearer. Not only is it clearer if you need to hit a button repeatedly instead of once, but the different button prompts are also appearing in certain spots on the screen representing the layout of the controller or keyboard. There's also now an icon on screen for a second to warn you that a prompt is coming up. Some hardcore fans might think that this is too easy, but I really thought it was cool without ruining the experience since it's only on screen so short, and I do believe you can turn this off in the options menu. You have sections where you walk around in a very linear fashion. Because of Medan was so corridor based, it was not that noticeable, but in Little Hope, you are often on a very broad road surrounded by lush forest, and there are invisible walls around every corner, which is a bit of a bummer. Often you are just being pushed forward, but there's still room to move around and collect clues and hints that might save you in upcoming choices or give background story, which will actually help in coming to conclusions on the story's plot twists. I'm also happy to report that in our experience, we did not have something similar, like what was possible with Medan, where a player would do something like get in a boat and escape, only to find out that by doing that, the player would literally not play for the rest of the entire game. There are still definitely characters that have less playtime than others, probably characters like John and Taylor are a bit lacking in terms of time spent on them. And so I do think Supermassive still needs to improve on giving all the players a bit more to do, because for some it can be a very passive experience. But it is much better than it was with Medan. The other minor critique point I would give it is that some of the writing can be a little bit cringe sometimes and seemingly out of place. Having two members talk about if they are a couple or not after having figured they are stuck in this mysterious fog is a bit weird. Or questioning that one is being all alpha male and overbearing in such a desperate time also seems like one does not have their priorities straight on surviving and keeping together as a group. But luckily, these moments are few and far between, and I pretty much ended up really liking all 5 characters, even though in the beginning, you think you won't. Characters like Angela are very grumpy and bitchy in the beginning. Taylor is a bit of an airhead with relying on her phone and wanting to split up from the group, and Daniel seems like your typical Ben Shapiro type of white guy. But what really worked for me is that these 5 were great as a group together, and I was genuinely so relieved and happy when the group reunited after being forced to split up multiple times throughout the story. What is also cool is that through the dialogue choices, your characters will have their personality traits increased and decreased, and so you can make Angela a lot less bitchy than she is in the beginning and have her fall better in the group. You can even unlock certain traits in people by making several choices, like someone becoming deceitful or aggressive. This will impact their dialogue, behavior, and even outcomes in cutscenes. They had some of this in Until Dawn and Medan already, but the execution of this system really flourishes here and has far more impact and meaning. What's cool too is that not every choice is as clear as day on what the outcome will be, and that is how it's supposed to be in my opinion. I hate the BioWare approach of having one answer in blue and one in red, so you already know what the good and what the bad answer is. Instead, you have to look at the choices you have in response and figure what would be good at that moment. And not everything might work out as well as you think. Once I found the gun, I decided to tell the others, since I did not want to keep that information behind their backs. But instead, I upset the first person who I told it to, and though they urged me to leave it behind, I decided to keep it, which lowered my relationship with that person even more. Then next up, that same person told another member of the group about me having a gun, and thus my relationship deteriorated with yet another member. Thus, in retrospect, it might have been better had I kept the information about the gun for myself. These moments are actually very great and are so fun to share with friends while playing. Though the group splits up a few times, the characters in Little Hope feel much more like a solid team than the ones in Medan, and thus is also so much more fun to play with friends. Because there's still a bit of unbalanced times in which you can get to play as everyone, I would recommend playing this with 2 or maximum 3 people instead of the 5. And yes, there are still even those moments where if you yourself make the wrong choice, it can result in the death of another player's character. So overall, this game is much better than its Medan predecessor, and I can highly recommend this to fans of horror games, story-driven games, and multiplayer games. The gameplay is all too familiar with its heavy rain style, and thus, this game's appeal revolves all around the characters, story, and writing, and despite some cringy writing at a few points, it delivers greatly on all those 3 points. Man of Medan got a 6.8, which wasn't bad, but definitely did not live up to the potential that it could have. But I'm so very happy to say that Little Hope gets an 8. Were to have better writing across the board, better scares, and also a more balanced experience for all players in terms of time being played as, then it would surely have gotten so close to that magical 9. Though I don't think it surpasses Until Dawn overall as a game, there are definitely sections or points with Little Hope that I do think surpass that game, since Until Dawn has a very slow start or sections that are a bit less exciting. Little Hope has a lot of dread and threats that make you feel tense from the very get-go, and there were moments where I felt more invested than in previous Supermassive installments. Little Hope is, together with Phasmophobia, definitely the horror game to get this Halloween to enjoy your holiday to the spookiest fullest.